Welcome. Between the late 1960s and the early 1970s, humanity's understanding of planet Earth changed drastically. Much of that change was due to a single photograph. It's entitled Earthrise. It was taken in 1968 by the crew members of Apollo 8. For many on Earth, it was a revelation, and for some, it was a profound inspiration for developing a robust environmental ethic. It's no accident that the first Earth Day then took place in 1970. But in fact, more than one Earth Day was celebrated that year. So, today, we'll look at two things. We'll start with one of the most inspiring photographs ever taken, and then we'll witness how debates about Earth Day and the direction of the environmental movement paralleled developing fractures in American society. Earthrise makes the Earth look placid. But 1968, the year when the photograph was taken, was an unhappy one. It was defined by global unrest. In the United States, the first half of 1968 saw two high-profile assassinations. Civil rights leader and pastor Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated on April 4th. June 6th then saw the assassination of presidential hopeful Robert F. Kennedy, brother of President John F. Kennedy, also a victim of assassination. But there were global tensions too, such as the Prague Spring, when the Soviet Union invaded Prague, ending a period of reform in the socialist nation. And then there were student protests in the United States, France, Germany, Mexico, Japan, and plenty others elsewhere. Some turned to violence, which began the fragmentation of the New Left into mainstream left and far left branches, the latter of which tended toward anarchism, often deploying terrorism, such as bombings and assassinations. In December 1968, when Earthrise was taken, the peoples of Earth were anything but happy. Apollo 8 launched on December 21st, 1968. The crew consisted of 3 astronauts: Bill Anders, Frank Borman, and James Lovell. The first live footage of planet Earth from space came about as follows. The crew waved to the camera, and then the camera was turned toward Earth. Given the quality of both cameras and television then, Earth looked a bit blurry. But as the film rolled, Borman narrated what he saw. It's a beautiful, beautiful view. A predominantly blue background and just huge covers of white cloud. And of course, the famous Earthrise photograph was taken on this trip. But it is often portrayed like this, as if Earth were above the moon. But the correct angle is like this. The Earth appears at the side, because Earth was seen as the crew was coming back around the moon. Responses to Earthrise were as profound as the photograph itself. For the astronauts, and many others back home, this was much more than the latest developments in the Cold War, and, thus, much more than a purely American achievement. As Borman later said, "We saw the Earth the size of a quarter, and we recognized then that there really is one world." Apollo 8 was a triumph for all mankind. On Christmas Eve, the Apollo 8 astronauts read aloud from the opening chapter of the book of Genesis. On the one hand, there was a political side to this. Soviet astronauts had been quite public in using Soviet space travel to denounce religion. So, the American decision to use something religious was part of Cold War strategy. On the other hand, reading Genesis was not an attempt at endorsing any single religion. As James Lovell later said, the idea of a divinely authored creation was the basis of many of the world's religions. Nonetheless, all 3 Apollo 8 astronauts were also Christian. Anders was Roman Catholic, Borman and Lovell were Episcopalian. So, Bible reading was not foreign to their own sense of identity, nor does it appear to have been unwelcome to most Americans. For example, Frank Borman received 34 letters of complaint about the reading of Genesis, but he also received 100,000 letters of approval. And the U.S. Post Office released this Apollo 8 commemorative stamp, which contained the opening words of Genesis. This combination of God, the Bible, and the space race was at once personal and political. One response to the Earthrise photograph proved of long-term importance. John McConnell, the son of a Pentecostal preacher and a self-identified evangelical, was a longtime peace advocate based in San Francisco. In late 1969, he persuaded Joseph Alioto, the mayor of San Francisco, to declare March 21st, 1970, the day of that year's spring equinox, as Earth Day. Of course, McConnell was not the only person influenced by Earthrise. As the famed anthropologist Margaret Mead said in her speech on the first Earth Day, "It was not until we saw the picture of Earth from the moon that we realized how small and helpless this planet is, something that we must hold in our arms and care for." Margaret Mead and Mayor Alioto were not the only notable figures who supported McConnell's Earth Day. McConnell was also involved at the United Nations. 1 year later, and again on March 21st, Hugh Thant, Secretary General of the United Nations, proclaimed March 21st as Earth Day. At that celebration in 1971, the Japanese peace bell at the United Nations was then rung, just as it would be on every Earth Day at the UN for the next several decades. This brought together McConnell's long-standing commitment to fostering peace, and, at an international level, it gave to the original Earth Day a political meaning, but one defined by aspirations for peace and goodwill. Shortly before his death in 2012, McConnell penned his memoirs, simply and appropriately entitled Earth Day. In that book, he explained his own thinking behind the date, and he included various texts, speeches, and declarations associated with the original Earth Day. Celebrating Earth Day during the vernal equinox was obvious. This is nature's moment of the equinox, when the sun crosses the celestial equator, causing the length of day and night to be equal, a state of equilibrium throughout the Earth. This is the true Earth Day, not because I selected it, but because it originates in the Earth's own rotation and revolution. It is nature's choice. McConnell was ecumenically minded as well, and he took encouragement from the fact that many religions and cultures had historically venerated the spring equinox, and he found support for his idea in other ways. One happened at the time. He reports that when he first told his wife that he decided to celebrate Earth Day on the spring equinox, a minor earthquake then followed. He took this as a sign. Another confirmation was in retrospect, namely the fact that Earth Day would be celebrated in San Francisco, which is named after St. Francis of Assisi, who, at the end of the 1970s, was named the patron saint of ecology. St. Francis was well known for his love of nature and his prayers for peace, two themes at the heart of McConnell's life work. But at this point, you might be wondering why Earth Day is now observed on April 22nd, rather than a month earlier on the spring equinox. In later 1969, Gaylord Nelson, senator of Wisconsin, began planning a large teach-in on the environment, and we see this here in his November 1969 newsletter. Working with national planners, Nelson and his team ultimately secured participation of 1,500 colleges, 10,000 primary and secondary schools, and an unknown number of religious and civic groups. And, as historian Adam Rome has noted in his study of the teach-in, in some places, Earth Day lasted much longer than a single day. This was all much bigger than McConnell's event just a few weeks earlier. Here was a national event. Perhaps unsurprisingly, especially at universities, professors of ecology and related fields often spoke at the Earth Day events of April 22nd. Much of this material was standard and involved explaining more complex scientific ideas to popular audiences. But in some participants, we find the beginning of what was later called eco-pessimism. Perhaps the most controversial such statement came from Stephanie Mills. She made national headlines in 1969 by using her college commencement speech to call for population control. In her words, "Mankind has spread across the face of the earth like a great, unthinking, unfeeling cancer. We have horribly disfigured this planet, ungrateful and short-sighted animals that we are." She then vowed to have no children and urged others to do the same. Her rapidly developing career saw her give 3 speeches on Earth Day. In his memoirs, John McConnell criticized Senator Nelson's Earth Day both for its more secular approach and for its inclusion of such political material. In McConnell's words, "The spring equinox Earth Day of March 21, 1970 was a celebration, whereas the April 22nd event was a protest. Earth Day had thus become an early witness, or perhaps better, an early casualty in what Americans later called the culture wars." So what? Other photographs of the entire planet followed Earthrise. In 1969, Apollo 10 released this photograph of the Earth. It too inspired John McConnell, who placed it upon the Earth flag, which he developed later that year. But then, in 1972, came the blue marble photograph taken by Apollo 17. Some historians have argued that it is the most reproduced photograph in history. And when McConnell revised his Earth flag in 1973, he did so by now using the blue marble photograph. And the Earth flag has not been changed since. And yet, despite wide recognition as creator of the Earth flag, McConnell has been largely forgotten when it comes to Earth Day. Some of the misunderstanding goes back as far as 1971, when Walter Cronkite of CBS mistakenly attributed the origins of Earth Day to college students. This was met with a rebuttal by Senator Nelson, who wrote in a letter to CBS that, in fact, no one else was in any way associated with me in originating the idea of Earth Day, or in the development of the concept. That same letter indicates that Senator Nelson did not anticipate further celebrations of Earth Day. In his words, on April 22, 1970, the objective of Earth Day was fully accomplished. But in fact, Earth Day, or at least McConnell's Earth Day, was celebrated in 1971, again at the United Nations, this time with the ringing of the peace bell. In his memoirs, McConnell alleged that Earth Day was stolen by Senator Nelson's team, and he says that subsequent attempts at resolving the conflict came to naught. Neither side was willing to compromise. So, in time, the two dates were conflated, and as far as I know, no one has yet researched the history of that conflation. That is a project for the future. If you're interested in learning more, these books are worth consulting. First is Robert Poole's extensive but readable study, Earthrise, How Man First Saw the Earth. It surveys the entire history of aerial and outer space photography, but it focuses most on the Earthrise photograph. Next, in 2011, John McConnell published Earth Day, Vision for Peace, Justice, and Earth Care, My Life and Thought at age 96. It combines his memoirs together with his most influential essays. And finally, there's an illuminating study of the famous teach-in that gave us the second Earth Day of 1970, The Genius of Earth Day, how a 1970 teach-in unexpectedly made the first green generation. It's by Adam Rome. That's all for now. Thanks so much for watching. Please hit the subscribe button. Feel free to leave a comment, and I'll see you next time.